Hey everybody, my name's Alex. I'll be going over something called the meta crisis. It is a pretty heavy topic, so this is a warning. Anyone who might get triggered from these kinds of conversations might want to check in with themselves right now, feel a little bit grounded to continue. If not, no problem. Listen to this some other time or choose a different presentation. With that being said, you know, today is a crazy time. We are faced in a time where everything about all human threats can be thrown into our faces 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for year after year after year after year, thanks to the internet and television and social media. Um, Here's a list of things just to wrap your mind around what is a meta crisis. We have microplastics in water and our bodies. We have rising rates of chronic disease. We have artificial intelligence and the emergence of a new intelligent entity. We have threat of nuclear war. We have climate change, rise in mental health issues, misinformation, political polarization, a potential economic collapse, major biodiversity loss, widening economic inequality where the rich are getting richer, failing infrastructure, potential new space exploration of going to different planets and the moon, consistently more and more pollution, the pandemics, diseases. So for all of us who are thinking about all these realities at the same time, the question is, what do we do with all these converging crises? It's not just one, it's many that are coming together. How do we cope with this overwhelming reality? And as counselors, how do we help our clients when we ourselves are experiencing the same types of crises in this world? So that's a little bit of an introduction of what we're going to be kind of going over. What is the meta crisis? It's mostly a philosophical term recently made popular by somebody called David Schmachtenberger. Um, he's like a philosopher and an educator, but it refers to a multifaceted phenomenon where there's basically this convergence of interconnected global challenges, such as, like I said, environmental degradation, like climate change, technological risks like AI, social inequality, and unrest, and existential threats to humanity. So it's more than just a list of global problems, but a representation of a failure in collective sense making and collaborative decision making, aka our civilization's fundamental systems like our economy, governance, and technology. They're not only failing to solve these crises, but potentially making them worse. That's the idea. This philosophical concept is not really new, can be seen in different contexts, like the Greeks to the Renaissance thinkers. However, never have we been in a time where we've been so connected globally. So there's an entire world that could be experiencing collective crises and experiencing all of the symptoms that come with experiencing such crises. In this space, there's discussion surrounding a trend of disconnecting from crucial aspects of what it means to be a human and to live in a human experience, such as abandoning things like your childhood, sense of childhood, social interaction, we're seeing with more isolation, a cosmic sense, being connected to faith or cosmic being, and a sense of self. What does it mean to be a self? So essentially, it's a collective feeling of spiraling out of control. So how is this relevant? Well, I'm sure you could think of some relevance to mental health in our field, but it's not just an abstract or distant concept. It directly impacts some of our people who we face, what they might be experiencing. So, for instance, something called eco-anxiety, which we're about to go over, existential dread, and a sense of loss of meaning. These things are very connected with this concept of the meta crisis. It's important to counseling because many people might not just be dealing with personal traumas or day-to-day stressors, but they're also dealing with overwhelmingly increasing weight of global concerns, whether they know it or not, whether it's conscious or subconscious. And individuals overwhelmed by that meta crisis might be experiencing similar distresses, like highlighting the need for effective suicide risk assessment techniques, things like that. So it's really hard to pinpoint this crisis because it's so compounding. It's been happening for so long, and it's global, and it's ironically flying under the radar or I should say, flying over the radar. So there are people like psychologists and famous philosophers that talk about it. One of them, Rollo May, saying that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Today, you could say that the meta crisis is the dizziness of global interconnectedness. So people like Viktor Frankl, where we talked about the meaning of life, those things could be very important right now, to help stress a sense of belonging and how meaningful life can be perceived to be based on how much existential anxiety you're experiencing. So counselors, we need to be prepared to not only construct our own meanings for self, but help others construct it in this chaotic world around us. There's something called solastalgia, which refers to the distress caused by environmental change, which might be a great starting point to help understand the psychological impacts of environmental despair and loss of meaning. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about eco-anxiety, climate change. A 2021 global survey actually found that 84% of young people aged 16 to 25 are moderately to extremely worried about climate change, with 45% experiencing significant impacts on their daily life, such as difficulty concentrating, sleeping, and enjoying life in general. The APA actually recognizes eco-anxiety as a clinically relevant condition now. So eco-anxiety, or chronic fear of the environmental doom, is now becoming increasingly common, especially with younger people. It's also has an element of grief to it, what we're losing in the present, what we're potentially losing in the future. And more, when more and more weather-related things come into our faces, like more tornadoes and hurricanes, we might start seeing an increase in this eco-anxiety, which could be a part of this meta crisis. So another part of it is the existential anxiety, like I was mentioning. It kind of makes us makes us confront death on not only an individual level, but a species level. We're faced with the possibility of not just, us dying, but with an entire species. That's the concept of a meta crisis and the existential threats that we might be facing all the time. So with increase in technology, quantum physics, space exploration, we might also come face to face with deeper truths about our existence that causes more crisis among how we perceive our own existence on a species level. This can lead to a loss of traditional meaning structures. People might present with detachment, nihilism, despair, hopelessness. When people fear there's no hope, no meaning, or no purpose, essentially no future, there could be obviously major risk of suicide, especially if suicide becomes trendy with social media, which is a very large threat these days. So information overload is another part of the meta crisis. Information overload, this is actually a direct quote, the information overload phenomenon has been known by many different names, including information overabundance, infobesity, infoglut, data smog, information pollution, information fatigue, social media overload, information anxiety, library anxiety, info stress. The list goes on, but you get the point, I think. In our hyper-connected world, we're drowning in information, but essentially starving for wisdom. This constant news about global crises could potentially start to lead to perpetual distraction and cognitive overwhelm and decision paralysis. What do I do? What should I do in the future? We're seeing this even with artificial intelligence and the rise of that, where kids are, going to college thinking, what do I do if my job is not even going to be there in 5-10 years? So this can result in anxiety, feelings of helplessness, and interventions might include, digital detox strategies and more mindfulness, more mindful consumption of news and social media. This overload of information isn't just annoying, but it's actually neurologically damaging. Scientist Daniel Levin, he's a neuroscientist, explains that constant task switching is what it's called, depletes the brain's neural resources. So therefore, we're potentially having massive amounts of people, potentially generations of kids and older adults, constantly living in states of low grade fight or flight. Their intentional systems being hijacked by the never ending stream of crisis information. So as counselors, this is important to understand the bigger picture so that we can help create the more correct solutions, especially when considering the neurological impacts of chronic stress and activated sympathetic nervous systems driven by this technology and this constant overload of information, especially what it has on developing brains. So again, one of the biggest points about this crisis, meta crisis, is like, what is the point? What is the meaning? This could deeply jeopardize people's meanings and stories of the world that they live in and their place in it. We see potentially a trend of nihilism with rising rates of depression and substance abuse, as narrative therapy, which I'll save that for a little bit later. But this is basically the challenge, is trying to create a new sense of meaning in a potentially crisis environment that suggests everything is doom and gloom, which isn't necessarily the objective truth either. But we'll talk about narrative therapy in a couple minutes. So collective trauma is another aspect I wanted to highlight with the meta crisis. Essentially, when a group of people experience a shared traumatic event, the pandemic that we went through, climate change, those are examples. The meta crisis might be contributing to this collective trauma on a global scale. As we know, COVID, again, was a collective traumatic experience that the entire world felt. Things like polyvagal theory and other trauma-informed theories can help explain the response of our nervous system, which can cause things like psychological numbing, dissociation, chronic stress, activation of our fight, flight, and freeze systems, all potentially contributing to a diminished ability to respond to such overwhelming threats. So collective trauma can affect entire societies, persisting beyond just direct survivors and influencing entire traumatized individuals with major existential threats compounding. So some questions to think about is like, how well can society as a whole respond collectively and individually to find solutions if we're all collectively experiencing a trauma? How well can we face adversity with resilience and perseverance and confidence and strength? And how well, can we move from a state of helplessness to confident, optimistic engagement with the world to solve problems? So just some things to think about. Uncertainty, another element, of something like a meta crisis. A lot of uncertainty can come from this, especially recently. Every week seems to be uncertain, which can introduce, deeper senses of instability, which is obviously important to feel safe and in control. Neurologically speaking, constant uncertainty and unpredictable stressors can be more damaging to our health than predictable ones. So think about that. Chronic uncertainty and stress can have extremely measurable effects that correlate strongly with anxiety and depression. Social media, this is a big one. To me, what is social media? It's a place where something like Hawk Tuah Girl can be created and spread into the minds of millions of people where it should have never been, and where billions of people could potentially be watching and listening to the same messages over and over and over again, engaging in self-validating echo chambers, constantly judging others and being judged themselves, being motivated to take some kind of action that will benefit a third party financially. My own personal little spiel there. Social media in many ways has created this global village of people just constantly judging and being judged. AI and algorithm tech experts often call social media behavior modification empires, where attention and behavior is shaped by algorithms designed for engagement, designed for you to click them, not designed for your well-being. So just think about that as a crisis, from a crisis lens. Social media which millions and billions of people can go on to, is designed for you to engage in it, to be addicted to, not necessarily to get you to feel good. So there's an endless amount of studies that just show how much social media is diminishing our cognitive and emotional capacities and potentially influencing entire generations of people. In fact, this book that I'm reading is called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Um, Again, social media, sure, it can amplify awareness of global issues, but it also can increase social comparisons, feeling of inequality, inadequacy, and this digital overload. And it can create those echo chambers and polarization. And this is extra important for us to consider as counselors, especially with crisis intervention, because as technology continues to grow and virtual reality continues to become a thing, and artificial intelligence becomes more integrated into the digital space and our society as we know it, we're going to have to evolve with it and understand what exactly is happening. This is just take a breath. I wanted to introduce the slide to take a breath, not only for you, but for myself, because that is the majority of the doom and gloom talk for now. So introduce a little bit of mindfulness here. And then we'll move on to some very good introductory solutions of what might happen. Well, what can we focus on that's a little bit more positive? Okay, so the future is actually pretty bright. I won't go into it too much, but there's a lot of information that suggests artificial intelligence can be really amazing for our health. We'll leave that there. But if we focus on strengthening relationships, enhancing cognitive skills, and building supportive social networks, we can help foster better resilience. With, like I said, all the technological advancements and biotech that's coming out, we're going to see a lot more solutions for the human brain and body. For instance, a study by Emory University has found that resilience is not just about bouncing back, but it's all related to the brain, how people's brains react to positive and negative stimuli, which shapes how well we will recover from trauma or chronic stress and crisis. This basically means that therapists and doctors could someday soon use these brain scans and brain patterns to identify clients' resilience factors, is what they're calling it. CBT and ACT therapy, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, can be adapted for this type of meta-crisis concern. This would involve identifying and challenging catastrophic thinking, balancing realistic concerns with hope, encouraging active behavioral changes, things that you can control, and committing to value-driven actions. Again, value-driven actions is the underlying part. Helping clients show, helping clients slow their thoughts down, which is a whole nother part of this as well. Mindfulness and acceptance strategies. Again, mindfulness is another way to help those that might be suffering from this type of meta-crisis as a way to engage with the reality instead of just escaping it or trying to reject it, trying to fight it, which a lot of people do. The overwhelm of this type of crisis can be paralyzing, obviously. It's the entire world we live in. So when there's no attempt to cultivate the present moment awareness and emotional regulation while living in this chaotic world, that's going to be extremely difficult to cope with. So meditation and breathing techniques can help facilitate more mindful states of being and radical acceptance without judgment. Narrative therapy, this is what I mentioned earlier. I think it could be a very powerful tool and therapeutic approach in addressing some of these meta-crisis concerns. We can help clients externalize the problem of global crises, identify unique outcomes, their strengths in facing those challenges, and to create basically new empowering narratives that can connect who they personally are to the hopeful narratives of the future and the potentially more human resilient side of things. In positive psychology, there's an emphasis on helping clients move from learned helplessness to learned optimism, and narrative therapy, I think, is a really great way to do that. Existential therapy, like I mentioned, is extremely relevant, perhaps more relevant now than ever, and it's going to potentially continue to be more relevant because helping clients confront the givens of existence, death, freedom, isolation, and meaningless is crucial to navigate such a high stressful crisis reality that we're living in. So we're not just, again, focusing on the personal level, but the collective level, collective choices, collective freedoms, collective isolation, things like that. It's very important to find and create meaning and purpose in this type of meta crisis environment. Group therapy would be a really great way to help people do that, to find a sense of belonging, to allow people to process some of these huge ideas and convergences of crises. So sharing with others, feeling the same thing, helps prevent isolation. It helps normalize the reactions to this craziness instead of having people tell you you're crazy for thinking about all this. Going to group therapy and talking about it with other people experiencing the same collective craziness is really empowering. And it would allow for more collective problem solving and, again, purpose exploration, which is part of existentialism. So group therapy would be really great for this type of crisis. I was thinking about the crisis intervention models from the book. I really think that some of the traditional ones would need to be adapted a little bit for something that's so invisible, so ongoing, like a meta crisis. It's not immediate, it's not obvious, it's not in your face. So it's not a discrete, time-limited crisis, but like I said, invisible, gradual forms of potential danger and threat. So I was thinking which one might be the best one that could help with this. And I think it would be the critical incident stress management framework, and obviously resilience and adaptation models would probably be the best to combine because they're so multi-phased and have long-term follow-up, and it's pretty flexible to be adapted. So last kind of couple slides here. Therapists and counselors, we're living in the same world that some of these clients are facing in terms of the crisis, the meta crisis feelings. We're at risk for compassion fatigue, and we have to practice self-compassion, treating ourselves with the same kindness that we would show to others, cultivating an ability to be present with this collective trauma without becoming overwhelmed by it. That includes, developing self-emotional regulation, mindfulness behaviors, and coping skills and ways to exist. Another part of this would be to allow ourselves to feel the pain of the world instead of just rejecting it, trying to be in a disillusion or in denial almost. That's not what we don't want to do. That we don't want to live in denial because it's going to get harder potentially. So as therapists dealing with the same heavy global issues as other people, we're at high risk for vicarious trauma and burnout. And it's important to develop our own ways to become more resilient and to learn how to balance the awareness of these global issues with the same autonomy and self-preservation, so that we can cultivate our own senses of meaning, our own senses of hope, everything that would help other people. So some ethical concerns, I really just had some questions to consider. Really is, how do our current ethical frameworks and therapeutic practices match the scale of our technological advancements, match the pace at which they are advancing? Again, we didn't talk too much about artificial intelligence in this presentation, but that's a question. To compare our ethical frameworks now to what it will become in 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, 30 years, something to think about. How do we ethically navigate these global issues while maintaining therapeutic neutrality? As the world continues to change around us at faster paces, these types of questions might become more and more common and more important to ponder, especially when we integrate more biotechnology into humans, into sessions, into spaces, virtual reality like AI, blockchain technology, privacy stuff. It's all coming into our daily interactions and ways of life. So we must balance the way to validate clients' concerns without becoming alarmists. And we have to become mindful and grounded, objective, and navigate all these global issues with them, but keep those appropriate boundaries. So it's some ethical considerations to think about. So that's it, really. In conclusion, I just think that there is a need for more larger systems thinking, more interdisciplinary collaboration within therapy, more meta-crisis informed therapy, more philosophical considerations. It'll help us as mental health professionals, really help others navigate these complex psychological challenges and understand global context instead of just individual symptoms. So hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching.